Sure. Below is the first part of the story, expanded to approximately 1,150 words in simple English and written in the third person. It focuses on creating an engaging narrative with vivid descriptions and emotional depth. Part 1. A cold, winter night. The city was quiet that evening except for the distant hum of cars speeding past on the icy roads. The air carried a sharp chill, biting at anyone who dared to step outside without proper warmth. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling softly on rooftops, sidewalks, and street corners. In one such corner, hidden beneath the dim glow of a flickering lamppost, sat a young boy named Marcus. Marcus was only 12 years old, but his eyes held a wisdom far beyond his age. His small frame was wrapped tightly in a thin blanket, its edges frayed and patched up multiple times. Despite the cold seeping through every layer of his worn-out clothes, he clutched a tattered notebook close to his chest, as though it were the most precious thing in the world. And to him it truly was. The notebook had belonged to his mother, a woman whose memory still lingered vividly in Marcus's mind. She had been kind, smart, and endlessly patient, teaching him everything she knew before illness took her away. Now, all Marcus had left of her were the lessons she'd imparted and this little book filled with scribbles, sketches, and notes. Every page reminded him of her voice, her laughter, and her unwavering belief that life could always get better, even when things seemed impossible. Tonight, however, hope felt like a distant dream. Hunger gnawed at Marcus's stomach relentlessly, making each passing minute feel longer than the last. He hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, surviving on scraps scavenged from trash bins behind restaurants. But even those morsels were hard to come by during winter. People rarely threw out food when they knew how scarce it became once the snow started falling. As Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the cold pavement, trying to find a position that might offer some relief from the biting wind, his attention was drawn across the street. There, near a row of overflowing garbage cans, stood a man dressed in what appeared to be an expensive suit. His polished leather shoes gleamed faintly under the weak light of another nearby lamp, contrasting sharply with the filth surrounding him. Yet something about the man looked off. His tie was loose around his neck, his hair disheveled, and his posture hunched over as though carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. Most striking of all was the desperation etched into his face, a look Marcus recognized too well. It was the same expression he saw in the mirror whenever he stared long enough. The man rummaged through the trash can, tossing aside empty soda, cans, and crumpled wrappers until he finally found something that caught his eye. It was a half-eaten loaf of bread, slightly stale, but still intact. For a moment the man hesitated, inspecting it closely before shrugging and raising it toward his mouth. "No!" Marcus shouted suddenly, startling both himself and the stranger. His voice echoed loudly in the otherwise silent street, cutting through the frosty air like a knife. The man froze mid-bite, turning slowly to face the source of the interruption. When his gaze landed on Marcus sitting cross-legged on the ground just a few feet away, confusion flickered across his features. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone wary but curious. Marcus tightened his grip on the blanket around him, suddenly aware of how insignificant he must look compared to this well-dressed man. Still, he couldn't stay silent, not when he knew the danger lurking in that seemingly harmless piece of bread. "Don't eat that," Marcus repeated, his voice firm despite the tremble in his hands. "It's moldy." The man blinked, lowering the bread slightly. "Moldy? How can you tell?" Marcus pointed toward the loaf. "See those green spots? That's mold. If you eat it, you'll get sick, really sick." For a moment, the man simply stared at him, as if trying to decide whether to believe him or dismiss him as a meddling child. Then reluctantly, he glanced back at the bread. Sure enough, tiny patches of green dotted its surface. With a sigh, he dropped it back into the trash can. "Thanks," he muttered, brushing crumbs off his fingers. "Guess I owe you one." Marcus shrugged, though a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "You don't have to thank me. Just try not to eat stuff you find in garbage cans next time." The man chuckled dryly, shaking his head. Easier said than done, kid. Not exactly rolling in options here. Something about the way he said it made Marcus pause. He studied the stranger more carefully now, noticing the dark circles under his eyes, the unshaven stubble on his jaw, and the faint tremor in his hands. This wasn't just someone down on their luck. It was someone broken. Someone who had hit rock bottom and didn't know how to climb back up. Curiosity got the better of Marcus. "What's your name?" he asked after a beat of silence. The man hesitated as though debating whether to answer honestly. Finally, he sighed and said, "Richard. Richard Langston." Marcus tilted his head, committing the name to memory. "I'm Marcus," he replied simply. "Well, Marcus," Richard began, his tone tinged with irony. "Any other advice for someone like me? Or are we done playing guardian angel?" Marcus frowned, unused to sarcasm but unwilling to let it deter him. Instead, he reached for his notebook and flipped it open to a marked page. "Here," he said, holding it up so Richard could see. "I've been keeping track of which foods are safe to eat and which ones aren't. Some things will make you sick right away while others take longer. Trust me, I've learned the hard way." Richard leaned closer, squinting at the messy handwriting and crude drawings. Each entry listed items like stale bread, safe, greasy fries, avoid, and leftover soup, check smell. Notes scrawled in the margins warned against certain smells, textures, and colors. This is impressive," Richard admitted, genuinely surprised. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since my mom died," Marcus answered matter-of-factly. "She taught me a lot about food safety, but after she was gone, I had to figure out the rest on my own." Richard fell silent, staring at the boy in front of him. Here was a child who had nothing, no home, no family, no security, and yet he had managed to create a system to keep himself alive. Meanwhile, Richard, who had once possessed wealth beyond imagination, couldn't even feed himself properly without risking illness. "You're something else, kid," Richard murmured finally, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. Marcus grinned, closing the notebook with a snap. "Yeah, well, living on the streets teaches you a lot of things. Want me to show you where to find safer food tomorrow?" Richard hesitated, unsure why he felt compelled to trust this scrappy little boy. But there was something undeniably genuine about Marcus. Something that reminded Richard of a time when he still believed in second chances. "Sure," he said eventually, managing a weak smile. "Tomorrow sounds good." As they parted ways, for the night, neither of them realized that this chance encounter would change their lives forever. For now, though, Marcus returned to his makeshift bed beneath the lamppost, clutching his notebook tightly. Despite the cold and hunger gnawing at him, he felt a spark of pride knowing he had helped someone today. Little did he know, Richard would soon become much more than just a stranger in need. He would become a beacon of hope in Marcus's journey toward a brighter future. Let me know if you'd like to continue with the remaining parts or make any adjustments. The next morning dawned cold and gray, with the sky heavy with clouds that threatened snow. Marcus woke up stiff and shivering, his body aching from another restless night on the hard pavement. He stretched slowly, wincing as he felt the dull pain in his back. Despite the discomfort, there was something different about today, a faint sense of anticipation buzzing inside him. Yesterday's encounter with Richard lingered in his mind like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Marcus glanced across the street where they had met. The trash can still stood there, its contents spilled out onto the sidewalk. But Richard was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, Marcus wondered if the man had simply disappeared, leaving their brief meeting behind as nothing more than a fleeting memory. But deep down, he doubted it. There had been something sincere in Richard's voice when he agreed to meet again, something Marcus couldn't quite explain but trusted nonetheless. With a determined sigh, Marcus tucked his notebook securely under his arm and began walking toward the nearby park. It was one of his favorite spots, not because it was particularly beautiful or peaceful, but because it often attracted people who tossed away half-eaten sandwiches or leftover snacks. Over time, Marcus had learned which benches were the best, places to scavenge without drawing too much attention. As he approached the park, he spotted Richard sitting on a bench near the fountain. The man looked even worse than he had the previous night. His suit was rumpled, his tie completely undone, and his face pale with exhaustion. Still, he managed a weak smile when he saw Marcus approaching. "You came," Richard said, his voice tinged with relief. "Of course I did," Marcus replied, plopping down beside him. "I said I'd help, didn't I?" Richard chuckled softly, though it sounded forced. "Yeah, you did. Guess I'm lucky you're not like most kids your age." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, tilting his head curiously. "It means—" Richard hesitated, searching for the right words. "Most kids wouldn't bother helping someone like me. They'd probably run the other way." "Well, I'm not most kids," Marcus shot back confidently. "Besides, you looked like you needed help. And I know what it's like to need help and not get it." Richard nodded slowly, his expression softening. "You're right about that. I've been struggling lately. Things haven't exactly gone my way." Marcus studied him carefully, noting the sadness in his eyes. "What happened to you?" For a moment, Richard seemed reluctant to answer. Then with a deep breath, he began speaking. "I used to have everything, a big house, fancy cars, money, you name it. People called me successful, powerful, but then—" His voice trailed off, and he stared at the ground, lost in thought. "But then what?" Marcus prompted gently. "I made some bad decisions," Richard admitted, his tone heavy with regret. "I trusted the wrong people, invested in the wrong things, and before I knew it, everything I worked for was gone. My business collapsed, my friends turned their backs on me, and now—" He gestured vaguely at his surroundings. "This is where I ended up." Marcus listened intently, absorbing every word. While he couldn't fully understand the complexities of losing millions, he knew what it meant to lose everything important. "So what are you going to do now?" he asked after a pause. Richard shrugged, looking defeated. "I don't know. Start over, I guess. But starting over isn't easy when you've got nothing." "That's not true," Marcus said firmly. "You've still got yourself. And you're smart. You figured out how to survive last night, didn't you? That's a start." Richard raised an eyebrow, surprised by the boy's optimism. "Surviving isn't the same as thriving, kid." "No, but it's better than giving up," Marcus countered. "My mom always said that life is like climbing a mountain. Sometimes you fall, but you gotta keep going until you reach the top." Richard smiled faintly, touched by the simplicity of Marcus's wisdom. "Your mom sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Marcus agreed, his voice softening. "And she taught me a lot of things, like how to tell if food is safe to eat, or how to find shelter when it rains." "Speaking of which," Richard said, leaning forward slightly, "you mentioned showing me where to find safer food. Can we start with that?" "Sure," Marcus replied, standing up. "Follow me." Over the next hour, Marcus led Richard through the streets, pointing out various locations where discarded food could sometimes be found. He explained the importance of checking expiration dates, avoiding items with strange smells, and steering clear of anything visibly spoiled. Along the way, he shared tips he'd picked up over the years, like how bakeries often threw away unsold bread late at night or how grocery stores occasionally left dented cans outside their back doors. Richard listened attentively, jotting down notes on a crumpled piece of paper he pulled from his pocket. At first, he felt embarrassed relying on advice from a child, but the more Marcus spoke, the more he realized how much he had underestimated the boy's resourcefulness. "This is incredible," Richard remarked at one point, shaking his head, in disbelief. "How do you remember all this stuff?" Marcus grinned, pulling out his trusty notebook. "I write everything down. That way I don't forget." Richard flipped through the pages curiously, marveling at the detailed entries and sketches. "You really think of everything, don't you?" "Not everything," Marcus admitted, "but enough to stay alive." As they continued their tour, Richard found himself opening up more and more. He told Marcus about his former life, the luxurious parties, the high-stakes deals, the constant pressure to succeed. In return, Marcus shared stories about his own childhood, painting a picture of a world vastly different from Richard's yet equally challenging in its own way. By the time they reached a small community center offering free meals, both of them felt a newfound connection. Richard no longer saw Marcus as just a homeless boy. He saw a survivor, a teacher, and perhaps even a friend. Inside the community center, warm air greeted them, carrying the comforting aroma of soup and freshly baked bread. Volunteers bustled around, serving plates of steaming food to those in need. Marcus guided Richard to a table near the window, where they sat down with bowls of hearty stew and slices of buttered bread. "This is nice," Richard said between bites, savoring the taste of real food for the first time in days. "Thank you for bringing me here." "You're welcome," Marcus replied, smiling. "But remember, places like this aren't always open. You gotta plan ahead." Richard nodded, understanding the gravity of Marcus's words. "I'll keep that in mind." After finishing their meal, they lingered at the table, talking about dreams and aspirations. Marcus spoke passionately about his desire to become a scientist someday, inventing solutions to help others in need. Richard listened intently, inspired by the boy's determination despite his circumstances. "And what about you?" Marcus asked suddenly. "Do you still have dreams, even after everything that's happened?" Richard hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I don't know," he admitted. "I used to dream of building empires, but now..." "Now what?" Marcus pressed. "Now I just want to survive," Richard confessed. Marcus frowned, shaking his head. "That's not good enough. Everyone needs something to fight for, something bigger than themselves." Richard stared at him, struck by the depth of his words. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that refused to be extinguished. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time I started dreaming again." Marcus grinned, satisfied. "Good. Because dreams are what keep us moving forward, even when life gets tough." As they left the community center together, neither of them realized how much this bond would grow in the days to come. What had begun as a simple act of kindness was blossoming into something far greater, a partnership built on resilience, trust, and the unshakable belief that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a way forward. Let me know if you'd like to continue with the remaining parts or make any adjustments. The days that followed marked the beginning of an unusual friendship between Marcus and Richard. Each morning they met at the same park bench near the fountain, sharing stories, advice, and meals whenever possible. To outsiders, their bond might have seemed odd, a well-dressed man in his 40s spending time with a scrappy homeless boy, but neither of them cared about appearances. For Marcus, Richard became someone who listened without judgment. For Richard, Marcus was a reminder of strength and resilience he thought he'd lost forever. One chilly afternoon, as they sat side by side on the bench, Marcus pulled out his notebook once again. This time, however, it wasn't to discuss food, safety, or survival tips. Instead, he flipped to a section filled with sketches of strange contraptions, some resembling machines, others looking like tools or gadgets. "What's all this?" Richard asked, intrigued. "These are my inventions," Marcus replied proudly, pointing to one of the drawings. "Well, they're ideas anyway. I haven't built any of them yet." Richard leaned closer, examining the sketches more carefully. One drawing showed a device designed to filter dirty water into clean drinking water. Another depicted a solar-powered oven capable of cooking food using sunlight. Though the designs were rough and amateurish, there was no denying the creativity behind them. "These are amazing," Richard said sincerely. "Where did you come up with these ideas?" Marcus shrugged modestly. "From watching people struggle. Like I see kids drinking water from puddles sometimes because they don't have access to clean water, or families going hungry because they can't afford stoves, so I thought, why not try to make something that could help?" Richard nodded, impressed by the boy's ingenuity. "You've got a real talent for problem-solving, Marcus. These aren't just random doodles, they're solutions to real-world problems." "Thanks," Marcus said, smiling shyly. "But it's hard to invent stuff when you don't have materials or tools. Plus, I'm still learning. Well, maybe that'll change someday, Richard suggested, his tone thoughtful. If you ever get the chance to study science or engineering, you could turn these ideas into reality. Marcus's eyes lit up at the idea, but then his expression dimmed. Yeah, if I ever get the chance, he muttered under his breath. Richard noticed the shift in his mood immediately. What's wrong? He asked gently. It's just... Marcus hesitated, fiddling with the edges of his notebook. Even if I wanted to go to school, how would I pay for it? I barely have enough to eat most days. School feels like a dream I'll never reach. Richard felt a pang of guilt hearing those words. Here was a child brimming with potential, held back not by lack of ambition but by circumstances beyond his control. It wasn't fair, and Richard knew it all too well. You know, he began slowly. When I was younger, I used to think education was the key to everything. Knowledge opens doors you didn't even know existed. But losing everything taught me that opportunities can disappear just as quickly as they appear. Marcus looked up at him, curious. So, what are you saying? I'm saying we shouldn't give up, Richard replied firmly. Not you, not me. We've both hit rock bottom, but that doesn't mean we stay there. If anything, it means we fight harder to climb back up. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing Richard's words. There was truth in what he said. Truth Marcus had always believed, deep down but rarely voiced aloud. Later that evening, as they walked toward a nearby library, Richard shared more about his past. He spoke of the relentless pursuit of success that had consumed him during his billionaire days, the sacrifices he made along the way, and the emptiness he felt despite achieving so much. I chased money for so long, thinking it would bring happiness, Richard confessed. But it turns out happiness comes from simpler things, like helping someone in need or finding joy in small victories. Marcus listened intently, connecting the dots between Richard's story and his own struggles. Do you regret it? He asked finally. Losing everything, I mean. Richard paused, considering the question. Not entirely, he admitted. Losing everything forced me to reevaluate my life. Before, I was living for wealth and status. Now I'm starting to realize what truly matters. Family, kindness, purpose. That's deep, Marcus joked, earning a chuckle from Richard. At the library, they settled into a quiet corner surrounded by shelves stacked high with books. While Richard browsed through business magazines and self-help guides, Marcus gravitated toward the science section. His eyes sparkled as he flipped through textbooks on physics, chemistry, and engineering, soaking in information like a sponge. Ever thought about building prototypes? Richard asked after noticing Marcus's fascination with the technical manuals. Prototypes? Marcus repeated, confused. Models of your inventions, Richard explained. They don't have to be perfect, just proof that your ideas work. Even simple materials like cardboard or plastic bottles can be used to create basic versions. Marcus's face lit up with excitement. Really? You think I could do that? Absolutely, Richard said with a grin. Why not start small and see where it takes you? Encouraged by Richard's enthusiasm, Marcus spent the rest of the evening sketching new designs and jotting down notes. By the time they left the library, his mind was buzzing with possibilities. Over the next few weeks, their partnership grew stronger. Richard introduced Marcus to local community centers and shelters, teaching him how to navigate resources available to those in need. In return, Marcus continued sharing his knowledge, reminding Richard of the importance of perseverance and hope. Together, they formed a team, a mentor and protege united by shared struggles and mutual respect. One day, while visiting a shelter, Marcus stumbled upon an old newspaper lying on a table. Flipping through its pages idly, he came across an article featuring Richard Langston. The headline read, "Billionaire Tycoon Loses Fortune Overnight." Beneath it was a photo of Richard standing confidently outside his former company headquarters, dressed in a sharp suit and tie. Marcus stared at the picture, stunned. Slowly, he turned to Richard, who was busy chatting with a volunteer nearby. When Richard noticed Marcus's wide-eyed expression, he stopped mid-sentence. "What's wrong?" he asked, following Marcus's gaze to the newspaper. You're that guy, Marcus stammered, holding up the article. The Billionaire. Richard sighed heavily, knowing this moment would come eventually. Yes, I am. Or rather, I was. Does that change anything? Marcus shook his head vehemently. No, of course not. I didn't realize you were famous. Richard chuckled dryly. Famous for failing, maybe. But you're trying to fix it now, right? Marcus pressed. You're not giving up? Not anymore, Richard agreed, meeting Marcus's earnest gaze. And I owe a lot of that determination to you, kid. You reminded me that no matter how bad things get, there's always a way forward. Marcus beamed, feeling a surge of pride. Good. Because I'm counting on you to succeed, and when you do, promise me one thing. Anything, Richard said earnestly. Promise me you'll use your success to help people like us. Marcus said firmly. People who need a second chance. Richard placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his voice filled with conviction. I promise. As they left the shelter together, Richard couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a desperate attempt to survive had transformed into something greater, a mission to rebuild not only his own life, but also the lives of others. And at the heart of it all was Marcus, a boy whose courage and brilliance inspired him to dream bigger than ever before. Let me know if you'd like to continue with the remaining parts or make any adjustments. Richard kept his promise. Over the next few weeks, he began taking small but meaningful steps toward rebuilding his life, not just for himself, but also for Marcus and others like him. Every day, he found new ways to channel his energy into something productive, driven by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. And Marcus, ever the eager companion, stood by his side, cheering him on with unwavering faith. One crisp morning, as they sat together at their usual spot near the park fountain, Richard pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was covered in scribbles, diagrams, and hastily written notes. Take a look at this, he said, handing it to Marcus. Marcus studied the page curiously. At first glance, it looked like a blueprint, but instead of machines or gadgets, it outlined a plan for something bigger, a foundation aimed at helping homeless children gain access to education, food, and shelter. What's this? Marcus asked, his eyes widening with excitement. It's an idea I've been working on, Richard explained. A way to give back to kids like you, kids who deserve a chance to succeed but don't have the resources to make it happen. You're serious? Marcus exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. Dead serious, Richard replied, smiling. I told you I'd use my success to help people, didn't I? Well, this is where it starts. Marcus couldn't contain his grin. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to imagine a future where dreams weren't just fantasies. They were possibilities within reach. The two spent hours discussing the details of Richard's plan. They brainstormed names for the foundation, debated which programs would be most effective, and even sketched rough designs for potential community centers. Marcus contributed ideas based on his own experiences, emphasizing the importance of practical skills like cooking, budgeting, and basic health care. We need to teach kids how to survive, Marcus insisted, but we also need to show them that survival isn't the end goal, it's just the beginning. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. This foundation won't just provide immediate relief, it'll empower them to build better futures for themselves. As their discussions grew more detailed, so did their bond. Richard marveled at Marcus's maturity and insight, while Marcus admired Richard's determination to turn his failures into opportunities for growth. Together, they became a team united by a shared vision of hope and transformation. Despite their progress, challenges remained. Richard still struggled financially, relying on odd jobs and handouts to get by. But he refused to let setbacks deter him. Instead, he used every resource at his disposal to move closer to his goal. One afternoon, while scavenging through a secondhand bookstore, he stumbled upon a book titled How to Start a Nonprofit Organization. Though its cover was faded and its pages dog-eared, the content proved invaluable. This is exactly what we need, Richard declared, showing the book to Marcus later that evening. It explains everything. from fundraising strategies to legal requirements. Marcus flipped through the pages eagerly, absorbing the information like a sponge. "Do you think we can actually pull this off?" he asked after a moment. "No, we can," Richard replied confidently. "It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is." Their efforts soon caught the attention of others. One day, while volunteering at a local soup kitchen, Richard struck up a conversation with a woman named Clara, who ran a small charity focused on providing meals to the homeless. When she learned about Richard's plans, she offered her support without hesitation. "You're onto something special here," Clara said, her eyes shining with admiration. "If there's anything I can do to help, just say the word." With Clara's assistance, Richard and Marcus began organizing workshops at the soup kitchen, teaching children basic skills like reading, writing, and arithmetic. The response was overwhelming. Kids who had once wandered the streets aimlessly now showed up regularly, eager to learn and participate. Among them was a girl named Lily, barely 9 years old, whose bright smile masked a life filled with hardship. She reminded Marcus of himself, a fighter determined to rise above her circumstances. Watching her grow more confident each day filled Marcus with pride and renewed determination. As the foundation took shape, Richard worked tirelessly to secure funding. He reached out to former colleagues, friends, and acquaintances, explaining his vision and appealing for donations. Though many turned him down, a few responded generously, moved by his sincerity and commitment. Slowly but surely, the pieces began falling into place. One evening, as they walked home from the soup kitchen, Marcus turned to Richard with a question that had been weighing on his mind. "What happens if it doesn't work?" Richard stopped in his tracks, considering the query. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "But even if it fails, at least we tried. And trying is better than giving up." Marcus nodded, understanding the wisdom in those words. Failure wasn't something to fear, it was something to overcome. Weeks turned into months, and the foundation officially launched under the name Brighter Tomorrows. Its mission was simple yet powerful: to provide homeless children with the tools, resources, and support needed to break free from the cycle of poverty. The ribbon-cutting ceremony took place at a newly renovated community center, attended by volunteers, donors, and beneficiaries alike. Standing on the stage, alongside Richard, Marcus addressed the crowd with quiet confidence. "When I met Richard, I never imagined we'd accomplish something like this," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "But here we are today, proving that no matter how tough life gets, there's always hope. Always a way forward." Applause erupted around him, echoing through the room like a symphony of triumph. Tears welled up in Richard's eyes as he watched Marcus speak, overcome with gratitude and pride. After the ceremony, Richard pulled Marcus aside for a private moment. "You were incredible up there," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks," Marcus replied, blushing slightly. "But none of this would have happened without you." Richard shook his head. "No, Marcus, you're the heart of this foundation. Without your courage and brilliance, none of this would have been possible." For a long moment, they simply stood there, savoring the magnitude of what they had achieved together. What had started as a chance encounter between a broken billionaire and a resilient homeless boy had blossomed into a movement capable of changing lives, including their own. That night, as Marcus lay awake beneath the stars, he reflected on how far he'd come. From sleeping on cold pavements to standing on stages, his journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet through it all, one thing remained constant: his belief in the power of resilience, kindness, and second chances. And as sleep finally claimed him, Marcus whispered softly to himself, "This is only the beginning. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with the remaining parts or make any adjustments." The success of Brighter Tomorrows marked a turning point not only for Marcus and Richard, but also for the countless children whose lives were touched by the foundation. Each day brought new challenges, but it also brought moments of triumph. Small victories that reminded them why they had started this journey in the first place. For Marcus, these victories weren't just about helping others. They were about proving to himself that he could rise above his circumstances. And for Richard, they were proof that redemption was possible, even after losing everything. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled in the wind, Marcus arrived at the community center earlier than usual. He loved being there before anyone else showed up. It gave him time to reflect on how much had changed since those cold nights spent huddled under lampposts. Now, instead of searching for scraps of food or dodging dangers on the streets, he spent his days surrounded by laughter, learning, and purpose. Today, however, something felt different. As he walked through the doors, he noticed Richard pacing nervously near the reception desk, clutching a stack of papers tightly in his hands. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, sensing the tension in the air. Richard looked up, his expression a mix of excitement and anxiety. "We've been invited to present our work at a major conference next month," he said quickly. "It's a huge opportunity for funding, exposure, and partnerships." Marcus blinked, processing the news. "That's amazing, but are you okay? You look like you're about to faint." Richard chuckled nervously, running a hand through his hair. "I'm fine, it's just, this is bigger than anything we've done so far. If we mess it up, we won't." Marcus interrupted firmly. "We've got this, Richard. Remember what you told me? Trying is better than giving up." Richard smiled weakly, grateful for Marcus's unwavering optimism. "You're right. We'll figure it out together." Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Richard worked tirelessly to prepare for the presentation. They gathered testimonials from children who had benefited from the foundation, compiled data showing its impact, and created visual aids to showcase their achievements. Marcus even designed a prototype of one of his inventions, a portable water filtration system made from recycled materials, to demonstrate during the event. "This will blow them away," Richard said proudly as he watched Marcus test the device for the 100th time. "It has to," Marcus replied, adjusting a valve, "with care. If we want people to take us seriously, we need to show them we mean business." On the day of the conference, nerves ran high. The venue was packed with influential figures, business leaders, philanthropists, government officials, all eager to hear about innovative solutions to societal problems. As Richard and Marcus took their seats backstage, waiting for their turn to speak, the weight of the moment settled heavily on their shoulders. "You ready?" Richard whispered, glancing at Marcus. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, clutching his notebook tightly. When their names were called, they stepped onto the stage together, greeted by polite applause. Richard began the presentation, outlining the foundation's mission and sharing stories of transformation. His words painted a vivid picture of hope and resilience, drawing murmurs of approval from the audience. Then it was Marcus's turn. Standing beneath the bright lights, he felt a surge of adrenaline and fear. But as he looked out at the sea of faces, he remembered all the times he doubted himself and overcome those doubts. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "When I met Richard, I didn't think my life could change," he said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I was just a kid trying to survive. But Richard believed in me. He saw potential where others saw nothing. And because of that belief, I found the courage to dream again." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "This foundation isn't just about helping kids like me. It's about reminding everyone that no matter how tough life gets, there's always a way forward. All it takes is one person, willing to lend a hand, or one idea capable of changing the world." The audience erupted into applause, moved by Marcus's heartfelt speech. When he unveiled his water filtration prototype and demonstrated its functionality, the reaction was electric. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes furiously, and several attendees approached them afterward, eager to learn more. The conference proved to be a turning point for brighter tomorrows. Donations poured in, partnerships were formed, and media coverage brought widespread attention to their cause. Within weeks, the foundation expanded its reach, opening additional centers in neighboring cities and launching programs tailored to specific needs. For Marcus, the newfound recognition came with both opportunities and challenges. People often referred to him as the face of the foundation, praising his ingenuity and determination. While he appreciated the support, he worried about drawing too much attention to himself. "I don't want to overshadow the other kids," he confided to Richard one evening. "They're the real heroes, not me." "That's exactly why you're perfect for this role," Richard replied. "You remind people that every child deserves a chance to shine. You're not overshadowing anyone. You're shining a light on them." Marcus thought about this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but promise me we'll keep focusing on helping others, not just me." "Promise," Richard said, squeezing his shoulder reassuringly. As the months passed, Marcus continued balancing his responsibilities at the foundation with his personal goals. With Richard's encouragement, he enrolled in a local school, determined to earn the education he had long dreamed of. Though adjusting to classroom life wasn't easy, he thrived academically, impressing teachers with his curiosity and creativity. Meanwhile, Richard focused on growing the foundation while rebuilding his own career. Using his experience and connections, he secured consulting roles with companies interested in sustainable development. These opportunities provided financial stability and allowed him to funnel resources back into brighter tomorrows. Despite their busy schedules, Marcus and Richard never lost sight of what mattered most: their friendship. Whether brainstorming, ideas over meals at the community center, or simply walking through the park, they remained steadfast supporters of each other. One evening, as they sat side by side on their favorite bench, Marcus turned to Richard with a question. "Do you ever miss your old life, being rich and famous?" Richard thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "Not really. That life was hollow. This one, what we've built together, is real. It has meaning." Marcus smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Good, because I wouldn't trade this for anything." By the end of the year, brighter tomorrows had transformed countless lives, including Marcus's and Richard's. What had begun as an unlikely friendship forged in hardship had blossomed into a legacy of hope, resilience, and second chances. And, though neither of them knew what the future held, one thing was certain. Together they had proven that even in the darkest times, light could prevail. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with the final part or make any adjustments. Years passed, and the impact of brighter tomorrows continued to grow. What had once been a small idea born out of desperation and hope had blossomed into a nationwide movement, touching thousands of lives across cities and communities. The foundation's success was undeniable, but for Marcus and Richard, the true measure of their achievements lay not in numbers or accolades, but in the stories of transformation they witnessed every day. Marcus, now a young man of 18, stood at the threshold of a new chapter in his life. His journey from a homeless boy scavenging for food to a high school graduate with dreams of becoming an inventor was nothing short of extraordinary. As he prepared to leave for college on a full scholarship, he reflected on how far he'd come and how much he owed to the man who had believed in him when no one else did. Richard, too, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Once a broken billionaire drowning in regret, he had rebuilt his life brick by brick, channeling his energy into something meaningful. Though he would never regain the immense wealth he once possessed, he considered himself richer than ever, not in money, but in purpose. On the eve of Marcus's departure for college, Richard hosted a small gathering at the community center to celebrate. Friends, volunteers, and beneficiaries of the foundation gathered to honor Marcus's achievements and wish him well. The atmosphere buzzed with laughter, music, and heartfelt speeches, but beneath the joy lingered a bittersweet undertone. For while both Marcus and Richard, this moment marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. As the evening drew to a close, Richard pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. They sat together on the same bench where they had first bonded years ago, surrounded by memories that felt both distant and vivid. "I can't believe you're leaving tomorrow," Richard said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Me neither," Marcus admitted, gazing at the lamppost that had once been his shelter. "Feels like just yesterday we were sitting here talking about moldy bread." Richard chuckled softly, shaking his head. Who would have thought that conversation would change both our lives? It wasn't just the bread, Marcus replied earnestly. It was you believing in me, giving me a chance when I didn't think I deserved one. You deserved it more than anyone, Richard countered firmly. You still do. They fell, silent for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, Marcus spoke again. Do you remember the promise you made me back then? About helping kids like me? How could I forget? Richard said with a smile. And I intend to keep it, for as long as I live. I know you will, Marcus said, his tone filled with conviction. But I want to help too. That's why I'm going to college, to learn everything I can so I can make a difference, just like you did. Richard's eyes welled up with tears, though he tried to hide them. I'm so proud of you, Marcus. You've already made such a difference, and I have no doubt you'll keep doing incredible things. Marcus grinned, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thanks, Richard, for everything. Without you, none of this would have been possible. Richard placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his grip firm yet gentle. No, Marcus. None of this would have been possible without you. You reminded me what it means to truly live. To care, to fight, to dream. You saved me as much as I helped you. The next morning, as dawn broke over the city, Marcus stood outside the community center with his suitcase packed and his heart heavy with mixed emotions. Volunteers and friends gathered around to bid him farewell, offering hugs, words of encouragement, and promises to stay in touch. But it was Richard who lingered the longest, unable to let go completely. Promise me you'll take care of yourself, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise, Marcus replied, smiling despite the lump in his throat. And you promise me you'll keep fighting for the foundation, for the kids, for yourself. I promise, Richard echoed, pulling Marcus into a tight embrace. As Marcus boarded the bus that would take him to college, he looked back one last time, waving until Richard's figure disappeared from view. Though sadness tugged at his heart, excitement bubbled within him. This was the start of something new, a chance to turn his dreams into reality. College proved to be both challenging and exhilarating for Marcus. He immersed himself in his studies, excelling in subjects like physics, engineering, and environmental science. His professors marveled at his creativity and determination, often praising his ability to think outside the box. Outside of class, he worked tirelessly on prototypes of his inventions, refining designs he had sketched years earlier in his tattered notebook. One project, in particular, captured everyone's attention: a solar-powered water purification system capable of providing clean drinking water to entire communities. Inspired by his childhood experiences, Marcus poured his soul into perfecting the device, determined to create something that could save lives. When he presented the invention at a national competition, it earned top honors, securing funding for further development. The judges hailed it as a groundbreaking solution to one of the world's most pressing issues. Reporters flocked to interview him, eager to hear the story behind the young innovator making waves in the scientific community. Through it all, Marcus remained humble, crediting his success to the lessons he had learned growing up, and to the man who had changed his life forever. Meanwhile, Richard continued leading Brighter Tomorrows, expanding its reach and impact. With Marcus's blessing, he launched a program called Inventors of Tomorrow, designed to nurture the creativity and potential of children interested in science and technology. The initiative quickly gained traction, inspiring countless young minds to pursue their passions. On weekends, Richard often visited Marcus at college, bringing updates about the foundation and listening to Marcus's latest ideas. Their bond remained as strong as ever, proof that some connections transcend time and distance. During one such visit, Marcus showed Richard the final version of his water purification system. "This is it," he said proudly. "It's ready to be tested in real-world conditions." Richard examined the device closely, marveling at its sleek design and innovative features. "You've done it, Marcus. Your mom would be so proud." Tears sprang to Marcus's eyes at the mention of his mother. Yeah, he whispered. She would. Years later, Marcus graduated at the top of his class, earning a degree in engineering. His water purification system was deployed in several developing countries, saving thousands of lives and earning international acclaim. He returned home a hero, celebrated not only for his achievements but also for his humility and dedication to helping others. At the graduation ceremony, Richard stood beside Marcus, beaming with pride as the young man delivered his valedictorian speech. "When I was 12 years old, I didn't think I'd live to see my 13th birthday," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I was hungry, scared, and alone. But then I met someone who changed my life. A man named Richard Langston. He taught me that no matter how tough things get, there's always a way forward. That belief kept me going through the darkest times, and it continues to guide me today." He paused, scanning the audience before continuing. "To anyone listening, whether you're struggling or succeeding, remember this. You are capable of greatness. All you need is one person willing to believe in you or one idea capable of changing the world. Together we can build a brighter tomorrow." The crowd erupted into applause, standing in unison to honor the young man whose journey inspired them all. As Marcus walked off the stage, diploma in hand, Richard greeted him with open arms. "You did it, kid," Richard said, his voice choked with emotion. "We did it," Marcus corrected, pulling him into a hug. Together, they stepped into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For Marcus and Richard, the road had been long and difficult, but it had led them to a place filled with hope, purpose, and endless possibilities. And as they stood side by side, watching the sun set over the horizon, they knew one thing for certain: their story was far from over. Let me know if you'd like any changes or additional details.